Beware the dark.
My friend and I were always getting into trouble on the internet. You know how it is back in 2001. Took forever to get connected, so you just kind of browsed one or two web pages at a time. I remember the gore sites were popular at my high school back in those days. I can't even remember the name of those sites. While surfing the web, we began to look into scary stuff. We knew Halloween was coming up, so it only seemed fitting. My buddy wanted to go to a dark ritual website that we stumbled upon. The site had spells and stuff about demons. I don't remember much about the site, but it was vague. The pages were just black and white print with words and instructions, some creepy images, and you could just print them out. I do remember some audio files of possession and EVP stuff being on the site. The site creeped both of us out pretty bad, but hey, it was almost Halloween. Being typical rebellious teenagers, we decided to try out one of the spells. I can't remember exactly what the spell was, but I believe it involved summoning a spirit you could only call upon on Halloween. We ran out of ink in the printer while trying to print. Maybe this was a sign. Too bad we didn't stop there. My friend said that he would get us some more ink before Halloween and we would try the spell. As bad as I hate to admit, we were both excited and curious to see the results. A couple of days later, Halloween arrived, and my friend invited me to stay the night. Of course, he mentioned he had printed off the spell. My mum said no problem, and off I went. He lived in a hot spot for trick-or-treaters. His dad's home was on the corner of a neighborhood. Just a typical, nice suburban home. We handed out some candy, and I remember his dad, who was a cool guy, telling us to keep giving the kids candy, and he was heading to bed. He worked a lot. This is when it all went down. Well, sort of. We turned out the porch lights and went to the bedroom to check out the instructions of the spell. Simple enough. From what I remember, we had to recite a few words and be in front of a mirror with a candle, and remain in the room for a certain amount of time. We went to the bathroom with a small candle, read the spell, stayed in there a while, and came out disappointed. We didn't see a thing or feel anything out of the ordinary. A couple of weeks later, we got the chance to hang out again. I stayed over at his dad's house, and we played video games all night. When it came time to pass out, he slept on the bed, and he had a nice recliner in his room that I would lay back in and go to sleep. It was like 3 or 4 a.m. and finally we turned off the games. This is when it happened. Not long after the lights went out, we both heard a scratching noise. The best way I know to describe it would be like a giant rat or animal of some kind, making a long tearing and scratching noise. The scratching stops, and then we hear the laughter of children and footsteps pitter-pattering down the hallway behind his room. We both shot out of bed and recliner, and he flipped on the light. I'll never forget staring at each other with our eyes wide in shock. We both heard it, and we knew what we heard. There were no children in that home. We checked the house to see what was there. Nothing. We still talk about it to this very day, and how we regret messing with the spell, and things we did not understand. This only happened once, but whatever it was, it felt wrong. Every night after work, I have to drive by that house. His family no longer lives there. The house always gives me the creeps, and I try to look away. Be careful when messing around with the unknown. Stay safe out there.
Back when my brother and I were children, we shared the same bedroom. The air conditioner always made my brother sneeze and snort, and it was a very distinctive sneeze and snort. He kept doing it for hours on end, and I couldn't sleep. I would usually get quite upset with him, as it was difficult enough for me to sleep, especially with the music going on. My brother constantly instigated fights between us as kids, and he admits that now. However, as a kid, my narcissistic mother always favored him and allowed him to grow his nails long to defend himself against me. Really, what that translated to was that when he was itching for a fight, he'd fight with me. Then eventually it would get to the point that he'd run away, and when he'd catch me, he'd claw my arms apart with his bare hands until they'd bleed. Eventually, I just put out my arms, let him torture me, since I didn't have any way to get away from that. Around the time that I was 16 years old, we built a new house in the front yard. One day I was home from school and went alone to the house in the back to collect some things to bring to the new house. The old house was still hooked up to the electricity grid, so after I finished collecting what I came for, I reached to shut it off from the main breaker. That's when I heard it on the other side of the house, where I had just been. Sneeze, snort. I froze. Now I hear footsteps running towards me. I freaked out, opened the side door to the house, just as the footsteps came into the same room with me just several feet away, and I couldn't get the screen door open. Since it didn't have a screen any longer, I jumped through the door and jumped off the steps, then ran as fast as I could all the way to the other house. When I got there, I was mortified as to if he was following me while I was getting to the door. Luckily, I was alone after that. That whole ordeal felt like forever, and I spent a good 15 minutes staring horrified out the back window. My brother came home from school moments after I finished staring for 15 minutes, and I asked him if he was in the back house. He said no, and he still had his backpack on from school. He isn't the prankster type, and I have no reason to doubt that he had just gotten off the bus from his school either. Just a quick note, when he chased me as a kid, he chased me through the house, then into the front yard where he'd rip my arms apart. I ran much further than that to get to the new house. That's most likely why the poltergeist stopped when I got to the new house. Also, it probably attached itself to me because of my energy signature. Being the same person he'd chase with such emotion over and over again, that it created a rip in time.
A demon lady used to haunt me. As I write this, I am a 41-year-old man, married and have 4 children. My story is from when I was 8 years old, but it was so vivid and real, I still feel like it was yesterday. Here is some of the backstory of my life leading up to the demon lady. My parents got divorced when I was 8 years old. I originally went to go live with my mum, my older brother, and my mum's boyfriend at the time. Everything appeared to be normal in our house. My brother was a bad seed, and his story could be a whole other post about his life. While living in this new house we all moved into, I remember finding a book about how to perform black magic. I was fairly certain that this was my mother's book, and truthfully, being 8 years old, had no idea what I was looking at. It was soon after this time that I went to go and live with my dad. One weekend when I was allowed to see my dad, my mum told me to pack up all my stuff and that I was going to go with my dad. I was under the impression that this was just another weekend trip and nothing more. It turned out that my mum, her boyfriend, and my brother were moving to Colorado this weekend while I was at my dad's house. However, I did not know any of this for 3 years. She didn't contact me for 3 years about her whereabouts. Again, that is a story from another day. Okay, so now I'm living with my dad and he is in a small apartment. He decides to move into a house to give us more room. We moved to a house on Sullivan Road in northwest Huntsville, Alabama. The moment we moved into this house, I have one word to describe how I feel living there, and that is dread. Everything about being in that house gave me this feeling. I was a latchkey kid growing up since my dad worked all day, and I remember walking home from school, dreading going home. I also remember as I was about to put the house key into the lock, I always checked the door. By checking the door, I mean I was checking for scratch marks, as if something was trying to claw its way in, or I would check to see if the door was broken into. I always had this feeling something was waiting for me on the other side. Once inside, I would run into every room except for one and turn on all the lights. The one room whose light I did not turn on was my own. I lived in this house for 6 months, and not once did I ever sleep in my own room. I had, up until this point, never had a problem sleeping by myself, until now. I always slept in my dad's room. As a matter of fact, I was so scared to go into my own room, I made my dad go in and pick out my clothes for me. Again, a complete and total feeling of dread came over me. Actually, there was another place that I never went to as well, and that was my backyard. I hated it in the backyard. I don't know what it was, but it always felt off. It felt darker. One day after school, I came home and did what I normally do: make a snack, watch some TV, and wait until my dad came home. Today was different though. I'm not sure why, but I decided I want to go into my room and jump on the bed. I don't recall what I was feeling before entering the room, but I remember being in there, jumping on my bed. Everything was fine until I looked out of my bedroom door, through an open hallway, and into another room. That was the first time I saw the demon lady. She was floating in the open doorway of the other room. I will describe her as I remember her. Like I said, she was floating off the ground. Her skin from head to fingertips was completely pale in color, almost grey. Her hair was long and looked like it had never been combed. I remember her hands because they seemed tense, like when you are trying to palm a basketball but there is no ball there. I also remember that her fingernails were black. Lastly, her eyes were black, but it felt like I knew she was staring at me. Her mouth was just there on her face. There was no menacing smile or anything like that. So there she was, and I was staring at her, and she was staring at me. I was terrified, beyond terrified. I ran out of the room as fast as I could, right past the demon lady and onto my front porch. I sat out on the porch for the next few hours, waiting for my dad to get home. Surprisingly, I never told my dad what I saw. I'm not sure why I didn't, maybe because I didn't know what I saw. After seeing the demon lady, things got worse for me in the house. I ended up not sleeping well. I missed over 20 days of school for half a semester because I was so terrified to be away from my dad. I was getting to be too much for my dad to handle. He decided to send me to my grandparents in Arkansas to live with it for a while. I'm sure he just thought I was a kid struggling with my parents' divorce and my mother leaving my life. So I was packing up to move to Arkansas, but before I left I did see the demon lady one last time. I was in our garage, hanging out, doing whatever kids do. There were two doors to the garage, one from the kitchen and one door to the backyard. I remember being in the garage and that feeling of dread coming over me. I turned towards the door from the kitchen and there she stood, the same as before, same hair, grey skin, and most notably, her piercing black eyes. I ran to the backyard as fast as I could. I hated the backyard and could not get out of there fast enough. Again, I waited on my front porch for my dad. That was the last time I saw her in that house. I moved to Arkansas and never once saw her while I was there. It was like she had never been part of my life. Things all seemed to go back to normal. I slept in my own room. My grades improved. I played baseball and girls liked me. Even more awesome was that my dad moved from Alabama to Arkansas to be with me. Things were going great for us, but my dad ended up getting a job in Alabama again, so we were going to move back. Still, at this point, I never told him about what I saw in the house. Everything started out normal, but eventually, I started seeing the demon lady in my dreams. I would wake up completely terrified and expecting to see her standing at the door. On another occasion, I remember experiencing a form of sleep paralysis twice, with a demon lady being present. In these instances, I was on my stomach, my head laying on its side. Above me was the demon lady, hovering. She was so close that her hair was gently grazing my face. This was the most terrified I have ever been in my life. I could not move and felt trapped. All I remember is eventually it being over. What eventually happened was that I started going to church when I was 11 and would mention the demon lady to a youth pastor from time to time. I don't think he knew it was such a serious thing for me in my life at the time. Who really would though? One time he joked that the demon lady was standing right behind me, and my first reaction was to cower in terror. It was at that moment that he knew it was serious. He ended up praying for me, and that this demon would leave me alone. Truthfully, it worked. I did not have another issue with it since that time. Now, did the prayer really work? Maybe. Or maybe I just grew out of this over time. I do know and feel that the times I saw her outside of my dreams, she was as real as a human standing in another room. And the terror was real. I did end up telling my dad about it when I was 18, and surprisingly, he seemed to listen. If you have a story similar or any insight about what this could have been, I would love to hear about it. Part of me thinks this is somehow connected to the black magic book my mother had. I never lived with my mum again, and saw her from time to time from my young age until now. But there are some other stories I've heard from her that make me think this. There was a 20-year gap where we never spoke to one another. When we did connect later in life, she mentioned that her and my brother used to perform seances together when he was older. She even admitted one time that they did this with my brother and a friend of his. The friend apparently had gotten possessed and ran out of the house. They did not see him for 2 days until he was found at the bottom of a cliff and was dead. She also mentioned the reason she left me and never contacted me was to protect me from my brother. She said she was afraid he was going to kill me.
Back when I was 19, me and my best friend Allison were super bored. At the time, she was living a street away from where I lived with my grandparents. So, like morons, we decided to go get a Ouija board because we both played it before and we knew it worked, and we were bored. I've always been interested in the paranormal, so I loved using Ouija boards. Not after this, though. So after going to Toys R Us and buying one, we decided to play it in the house she was living in at the time because it wasn't a permanent situation, and we didn't want any kind of spirits lingering around my grandparents' house. We decided to play it in the closet in the master bedroom, which was laid out so there were no closet doors or bathroom door. It was like a little hallway that led to them both. We decided to play in the hallway, so we lit a candle and started moving the planchette in circular motions to give the board energy, and then we started asking it questions like the obvious one. Is there anyone here who wants to talk? And silly ones like, who will we marry? Dumb questions really, because we thought we were talking to a nice spirit, and honestly at the time we really wanted to know what was going to happen with our futures, because we were both dating assholes. So I asked another silly question. If you ask me, how will me and my boyfriend break up? Whatever we were talking to responded with, he's going to die. Of course, I asked, how? and it literally said car accident. Then I asked, with who? And again, this thing knew absolutely everything about my boyfriend's life. It knew he was going to be with, which was the guy he worked with every day, and the creepiest part was, it didn't even spell out the guy's real name. It spelled out his nickname. It gave me and Allie the chills, and the candles went out. And at one point, we were so freaked out, but decided to ask it one last thing. What's your name? And it started spelling out M-A-M-A over and over again. At the time, I did not know any other demons' names except for Zozo, but I found out that Mama is one too. At this point, it wouldn't stop spelling out the name Mama, so we got scared and we forgot to say goodbye. We just got up, threw the board in my trunk, and sped as fast as we could to my grandparents' house, right down the road. When we got there, it was later in the night and my grandparents weren't home. We walked into my kitchen and turned on the light, and before we could really get a word in there, was a huge bang came from my computer room, which was in the back of the house. At first I thought it was just one of my cats because they really like laying on the keyboards and knocking things off the desk. But when I looked up from staring down at the kitchen counter, all of the animals were out in the back porch. I made Allie come with me to look and see what the hell was back there because somehow I just knew it was not a person in my house. I don't even think I thought of that scenario, honestly. When we finally opened up the door, the keyboards were on the floor, a bunch of papers, and my grandpa's office phone. And all you could hear was the dial tone, like, eh, 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 eh. I immediately picked up the phone and cleaned everything up, and we booked it out of my house and left for her mom's house. About 3 weeks go by, and I've been at home with my grandparents, and throughout the 3 weeks, it was eerie, and I felt scared, like someone was watching me. I didn't really like being home alone anymore, especially after what happened that one night. Every night I would notice that the corner in my room above my door was much darker than all the other ones. My TV would be super bright, or I would have my little lamp on or nightlight, and that corner would still be pitch black. And whenever I tried to look at it, it made me sick. I was so scared. Then one night, around 8 or 9 p.m., I was lying in bed watching the Kardashians, and my grandparents were in the living room, literally right outside of my room watching their TV shows together, when all of a sudden I fell into a deep sleep. I woke up not even 5 minutes later, and when I woke up I realized I couldn't move. I couldn't speak, and it was extremely hard for me to breathe. I know people think that this is sleep paralysis, but I'm here to tell you that it's not. Sleep paralysis is when you're dreaming and your mind is aware that you're sleeping, but you'll be having a nightmare and you can't move or scream. This is different. When you wake up in your bed and you're wide awake and well aware of what's going on, I'm positive that 99% of the time it's some sort of demon attacking you. I had been studying the paranormal for some time at this point in my life. I was just infatuated with it, like I still am today. But once I realized that I could not move, scream, and I couldn't breathe too well because it felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest, I started freaking out. The next thing I know, I'm being pulled out of my bed head first. Head fucking first. It felt like something was pulling me by my shoulders. I started being dragged over the nightstand that was next to my bed, and all of a sudden I slowly started turning to face the ground. Now all of this took place over about 6 minutes, So you can only imagine how slow I was being pulled out of my bed, and there was nothing I could do about it. I kept trying to scream for my grandma, but I couldn't. I was terrified. And then I remember what my dad had told me. Pray. When I tell you the second that I said, God, please help me, in my head, whatever had its grasp on me let go and dropped me on my face. And the word, Andma, came out of my mouth, because I was still trying to scream for her while I was praying. After that, I threw the board over a bridge and began praying every day and blessed my room and the rest of the house. Nothing ever happened again while living there with them. This was definitely the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me, and I've been through some scary things.
We went to a ghost hunting tour 6 or 8 years ago and did some of our own investigation in an old cemetery. Since we'd never done this before, it was like going to war without carrying weapons. Long story short, my husband saw a shadow figure peeking out from tree to tree, so he started freaking out and yelled, "Something is following us, run!" Weeks or months passed. Dead time, around 3-4 a.m. I was sleeping, and I feel a pain around my neck, and my left leg feels like something was trying to break it into pieces. I woke up thinking I was dreaming, but I wasn't. My husband's arm was around my neck, doing a headlock on me, and his legs were trying to break mine. I tapped his arm to let go, but instead, it had gotten tighter and tighter until I could barely breathe. All I can think of is this man that I married is trying to kill me, and I'm not going to die without a fight. I rammed my elbow into his rib, and the next thing I know, he yelled, "Ouch! What happened?" I jumped off the bed and yelled, "If you're trying to kill me while I'm awake, so at least I have a fighting chance, you fucking coward. Let's go." Confused, he asked, "What did I do?" "You were choking me, and you were trying to break my leg." "Oh, sorry, hon, I didn't mean to. I thought I got the shadow figure that I saw in the cemetery, because it's trying to pull me into this black portal that looks like a wormhole. I told it that if you're taking me there, I'm going to kill you first. I'm really sorry, honey." With that, I didn't accept his excuse. All I can think of is he will try to kill me again. I slept away from him. At least if he does it again, I have more advantage that way than facing him. He loves ghost hunting. I don't, but I love hearing the history of the places, especially during Civil War. His theory is now against mine. His thinking is just a bad dream. Spirits or demons can actually follow you home. He listens to professionals rather than me with experience. I used to be a Wiccan, and I've seen things that he hasn't seen before. He's not a skeptic either. He wanted to go on another ghost tour, and another one, and I said, "Stop. We will end this now because you are already being attacked, and you are not getting the message." We attended a panel discussion with the guys from Ghost Hunters. Oddly, somebody asked the same question I wanted to ask them. "Can spirits follow you home after ghost hunting?" Steve Gonsalves clearly said, "Yes, they can." I looked at my husband and told him, "What did I tell you? Why can't you believe a word I'm saying?" It happened again. He grabbed me in his sleep, but this time I was awake. I woke him up carefully. I don't know where his spirit is, but he has to come back carefully. Another attack happened again, like something pinned him in bed and closed his mouth. I took his hand and recited the Lord's Prayer. It's always the same shadow figure. He woke up and tells me, "Thank you, hon. That thing was pulling me into that portal again." Then I heard your voice and saw you reaching out to me, and I grabbed your hand and that woke me up. What were you saying? I was praying our Lord's Prayer. I can see you are in need. We went to church and had him blessed. Trust me, we go to Catholic church every Sunday. Then another attack. This time he said he saw Jesus Christ reaching for his hand. I woke him up again. Then I met an online friend. Lucky me, he's a Roman Catholic knight. He told me what to do. Smudge the inside of the house. Sorry to say this, but you might have to do this every month for the rest of your life. If you don't do this, I have a feeling possession is the next step. I'll teach you, he said. Sure enough, it stopped. If my schedule of smudging is getting close, one of us will have a nightmare, including my dog. With my dog, he is either growling in his sleep or crying. I already know he too was being attacked by something, and he is seeing something, usually staring at the ceiling or in the bathtub. All that will stop each time I smudge the house. And yes, I will do this for the rest of my life. Demons feed on fear. Always remember that. I've gone through a lot of hell. Demons are the least of my worries. Yes, it's a low-level demon that wants my husband. He wants to possess my husband so he can have a meat suit. Not on my watch it will. He can try, but he will fail, again and again. It's been almost 4 years, I think, that he hasn't had a nightmare. It's just waiting for another opportunity, but I'm not letting my guard down. If he doesn't stop bugging my family, I'm not stopping either. Thank you for taking your time to listen to my story. Hello watchers and listeners. If you enjoyed that video, please hit the like button, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. A big thank you to Just Plain Creepy for collaborating with me on this one. There will also be a collaboration I did over on his channel. There should be a link in the description below. A huge thank you as always to all the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. Links to each story are in the description below. If you have any stories you would like to share on this channel, please send them to my email, which is also in the description below. As always, thank you to everyone who continues to support me. I really do appreciate it. Stay safe.